This is the Protestant Libertarian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute and part of the Christians for Liberty Network. I really hope that you guys enjoy today's show. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. My guest today is Lisa Watson. Lisa is a former social justice activist who has become a champion for public education policy reform and is the host of the Schools Out podcast for the Herzog Foundation. Today, we'll be discussing her journey away from the left, the problems plaguing the public education system, and how we can fix it. Lisa, welcome to the Protestant Libertarian Podcast.
Thanks, Alex. Loved it. I'm so happy to be here.
Hey, I'm really excited to talk to you today. We've been going through some technical issues so far, but I know we're going to make it work this time. Before we get started, just tell us a little bit about your work.
Okay, so I am definitely a former social justice activist. Now I call myself the free market education activist. So I am dedicated to helping kids escape failing schools. Whatever that takes, whatever that looks like, we're going to build a new model, and we're the pioneers.
Yeah, I love that, and I want you to give us a little bit before we start talking about education, which we're gonna have a conversation about today. Tell us a little about your background, because you were a former social justice advocate, and when I say that, like I mean like you were in it in a way that a lot of people that claim that they were on the left would not understand. So tell us a little about your background and just how deep you were into a lot of this.
Okay, well, I can tell you I didn't grow up with an idea to become a leftist, but that somehow happened. So I'm just a regular Midwestern girl from Kansas, but I ended up moving to Los Angeles to go to college. And when I was there, I got introduced to some ideas that I really was not familiar with. One in particular was a professor who casually said that all religions are the same and that humans just make these things up to explain the universe. And I remember being stunned. I was shocked. I had never heard an adult say something like that. And I thought, is he saying that Jesus is the same as Zeus and Apollo? So that started causing a little bit of cognitive dissonance to me. And over the course of time, I was in a lot of doubt and confusion. And then after a while, I just started calling myself an agnostic, that I really didn't know. I really had never been equipped with being able to make the argument for Christianity. So I ended up moving back to Kansas City, graduated from a university here. And while I was there, I was working at the Women's Center. So without even realizing it, I'm being immersed in a feminist worldview, feminist ideology. By the time I was a senior, I was looking for an internship. I ended up getting an internship at Planned Parenthood. So again, without even realizing it, you're being immersed in a pro-abortion worldview. I also got a job in the telecom industry. While I was there, I became a union steward. So again, without even realizing it, you're being immersed in a lot of socialist ideology, socialist worldview. By happenstance, I attended a party. It was a friend of a friend, and I'm at the party, and the woman that's the hostess of the party happens to be the president of the ACLU. So we hit it off. Within a few weeks, I was now on the board of the ACLU. While I was there, I became the affirmative action officer. Soon after, I was the co-founder of the Racial Justice Task Force. Soon after, I was the president of the chapter. And soon after that, I was seated on the national board in New York City. So to be honest with you, I was living my dream. I had no desire to stop. And I was not looking for Jesus, which is what happened to me. That was the trigger that pulled me out of the left.
Yeah, and you have a really powerful story about how that happened. So go ahead and tell us that. What was the trigger that motivated you to leave?
Okay, so as I said, I was minding my own business and I was at home, perfectly satisfied with my worldview, my life, everything. I actually started to watch a television show. That television show was on the screen on the guide channel that it was going to come on. But when I clicked on the button, that's not what came on. Instead, there was another show that came on, and the name of that show was I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. I thought that was the funniest title. And I said, oh, I'm going to watch this. So the host of the show, his name is Frank Turek, he announced that he could prove the existence of God, and he did not have to use the Bible. I thought that was funny, and I said, go for it. So it turns out that he is an apologetics guy, which I never had heard of apologetics. But he starts dismantling over the course of 45 minutes or so. He's dismantling my worldview. He's exposing a lot of things that I had been told that I had believed. An example of one of the big ones was he said that when Einstein was developing his theory of relativity, the general theory of relativity that we're all familiar with, that he actually got a Nobel Prize for, that he changed the formula. He changed the data because he was not getting the answer that he wanted to get. He wasn't getting the answer that matched the scientific worldview at the time. So he changed the data so it would match what was the current worldview. Then he gets the Nobel Prize. And I was like, what? I started scribbling notes now. I'm scribbling this thing that this man has said about Einstein. And I'm like, he's Einstein. That can't be true. So he starts giving more information at that level, at that caliber. He's talking about hoaxes within the evolution movement. He's talking about lies in Darwinism. He's talking about lies in the textbooks that had been repeatedly proven to be lies, removed from textbooks, and then put back in textbooks. So by the end of the show, I'm actually feeling dizzy. I'm a little lightheaded. And then I hear a voice, and the voice said, "You're being lied to." I heard it crystal clear. And I thought, all of those people on this show that he's talking about, they don't know each other. He talked about people over the course of centuries. They all can't get together to have a lie, to tell me a lie. Then the voice said, the God of the Bible is true. Jesus is his son. When Satan fell, he took a third of the angels, and they created all the other religions because they want to be worshipped. Well, Alex, this thought has never occurred to me in my life. And I felt like I was supposed to respond. And all I could come up with was, I got to look into this. And then it was over. And I had a piece of paper. I had this man's name, Frank Turek. I had the name of his show, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. I had these data points that he had mentioned. And I had YouTube. And I started looking. Now, the algorithm is such that the more whatever you're looking for, it'll start giving you more information along that line. So that's what happened. I started looking. I confirmed that Einstein did admit that he changed the data. I find some evidence about Edwin Hubble, the Hubble Space Telescope, where he talked to Einstein and told him that he's getting this different data from his work. And Einstein said, yeah, I got that same information. So Hubble is the trigger for us to get the expanding universe that got us to the Big Bang Theory. Before then, they had another theory. And that theory was called steady state. And they believed that the universe was eternal in this exact state, steady state. So when Einstein was doing his work, he was getting evidence that there was a beginning to the universe. But there can't be a beginning if it was eternal and all the same. So he changed his data to make it as if it matched the steady state theory. So as I said, I got new information. And I hope that I'm one of those people that when you get new information and it's new data and it's definitive, that you have to be willing to change your mind. So, as I said, I kept getting new information. It wasn't only about evolution. I was getting new information about all of the worldviews that I was holding. So as I got new information, as difficult as it was to absorb, I was slowly, check by check, issue by issue, my mind was being changed. So at one point, I thought it was as uncomplicated as, am I in the wrong political party? So I sat down and I wrote a list of Republican or conservative or libertarian issues. I wrote down tax policy. I wrote down strong borders. I wrote down school choice. I wrote down everything I could think of that was a conservative issue. Then I started looking up organizations that supported those issues. And I started going to conservative meetings. I started going to conservative political candidate events. And I would sort of sit in the back and then I would just listen to what they said. And then by the time it was over, I would have the same thought. And that would be, what's the plan? They never gave a plan. They never gave any orders. They never had anything you were supposed to execute. I would be walking to my car and still thinking, what's the plan? What are we supposed to do? So at some point, I got pointed. I got another divine word that I was supposed to go in the K through 12 education. It was school choice. That was the issue. That was driving the whole split that we're having in America right now. And it immediately made sense because if you think about all of the other issues that we're struggling with poverty issues. But the K through 12 system is feeding into the poverty issue. For example, in the Black community, the statistics came out that we have fourth graders. 82% of the fourth graders are not literate in reading and math. Well, it's a no-brainer that if you're not literate in reading or math, you're not going to be able to get a good job. You're not
Right.
going to be able to start your own business. So if we address the literacy in reading and math, the conveyor belt is logically going to pull us away from poverty. Does that make sense? You're less likely to be in poverty if you're literate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was the same with, let's just say, abortion. A lot of the abortion statistics, they correlate to poverty. The prison statistics correlate to poverty, which correlates to the illiteracy problem. So instead of trying to fix the problem at the end of the conveyor belt, where the solution is consistently going to be a government program, why don't we solve the problem at the beginning of the conveyor belt? The 5-year-old isn't on welfare. The 5-year-old isn't headed to prison. The 5-year-old is just a clean start. So if we can get parents access to quality education, we should be able to solve a lot of the poverty issues.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I want to talk to you too about so we know why the left took over the public schools. It's because, as you said before, if you want to control a society, if you want to shape or move a society in a particular direction, then you take control of the education system. So it makes sense that the left will want to do that. And I think that, as you've acknowledged too, this is not just like a left-wing exclusive phenomenon, but they've done such a good job at doing that. So why is it that the left seems to be in control of the public education system? How did they go about taking that over?
Okay, so when you're like immersed in a model or a system, you really don't see it because it's just what you're used to. It's like being American. We're just used to being American. We don't really we don't do a lot of examination from outside of our American model. But over the course of time and having a lot of conversations with conservatives, I realized that there's two different models for change. Does that make sense that there could be two different models? So if you're operating on one model and the left is operating on another model, you're not going to get the same outcomes because you have different ingredients. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so it actually makes more sense to start out talking about the conservative model. And the reason I do that is because conservatives actually controlled all of the systems in America. And then I tell people I like to do a 100-year snapshot because it's not about what happened in the last year or the last 2 years or the last 10 years, but a 100-year snapshot gives us a very good quality picture to see what happened, like an autopsy. Once you have a
Right.
problem, you might want to have an autopsy over the situation. That's how you're going to learn the best lessons. So 100 years ago, if we looked at each system in America, it was not owned by the left. The left did not own the culture 100 years ago. We were not socialists, feminists, pro-choice,
Yeah.
anti-Christian 100 years ago. So that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's more about how you lost, not about how they won. I mean, there are two sides of the coin, but I do like to have some personal responsibility put in the
Right.
lap of conservatives, Christians, and libertarians.
Right.
You lost something. So the country was founded as a libertarian country, a Christian libertarian country. You read our founding documents, it's woven throughout the documents. Christian libertarian, right?
Right.
Focused on self-governance, Christianity and self-governance. So at some point, there were some triggers that pulled us away from that. So when I'm talking to a lot of conservatives, they have their little speech. It always revolves around John Dewey, revolves around Saul Alinsky. If I have to hear this again, literally, I'm going to scream. Okay. So John Dewey, this is what I like to say. John Dewey, Saul Alinsky, and all of those leftists that they talk about from a century ago never, ever saw the benefit of what they were advocating for. They were dead before America became this quasi-socialist, leftist landscape that we see right now. But they still did the work 100 years before they were going to see the fruit.
Yeah.
So I always say, isn't that biblical? Didn't they walk by faith and not by sight? The left is very biblical. I became shocked again and again. I probably have a dozen scriptures that match everything that the left did to get us to where we are right now. Okay. So let me identify the conservative, Christian, libertarian model. I call that model issue advocacy. That makes sense. Issue advocacy. Let's give an example. There could be some tax increase that is proposed in your community. They want to raise taxes or some levy, and the conservatives, the libertarians say, no, we do not want this tax increase. And they get agitated and they get organized and they print signs and they put them all around the community and they do phone banking and they say, no, we're going to defeat this tax increase. Are you familiar with that process? We've seen
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We see that happen quite a bit.
Oh, it just happened here. And they did a good job and they won. I'm really happy. So now I have to be very interactive now. Okay. So when that happens, and they got all those groups and all those individuals activated to defeat that levy, after the levy is defeated, what happens to those people? Where do they go?
Yeah, usually it's like nothing. It's over. Once they do the one thing, it's done.
It's over. Exactly. Now I will compare that to liberals. When they get them activated for a cause, they keep the people. They become what's called an activist class. So there is an activist class on the left. If they need people out on the streets for BLM, they can have it done in 24 hours.
Yeah.
They need people out in the streets to protest the pro-abortion policies. They can get those people out on the streets because they operate on a different model. So now I'm going to start identifying the model on the left. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Have you ever heard of the feminist movement?
Yep.
Have you ever heard of the labor movement?
Yep.
Have you ever heard of the civil rights movement?
Absolutely.
The pro-choice movement?
Yep.
Black Lives Matter?
Oh, yeah.
Climate change?
Yep.
What Marriage equality movement.
Yep, all of it.
Okay, so there's about, let's just say, 10 of these movements I could
Yeah.
identify over the course of that 100-year snapshot. We've had about 10 of these movements. All of them have an activist class, which they maintain. So the left operates on a model that's called the social movement model. It's not about the issue. So let's go back 100 years. What created the feminist movement? They had an issue. Women wanted to vote. So they had an issue. They started advocating for the issue, and then they won, and then they did not go back home.
Yep.
So the issue was just fuel for the feminist movement. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So each
absolutely.
one of these movements start out with some issue. So the labor movement starts in the 1930s when they want to start unionizing some of the big industries. They won. They got a union. But they did not go back home. The civil rights movement, they want to dismantle desegregation. They do that, but they do not go back home. So they create permanent movements. So the last thing you want to do in your movement is win. Let me give you an example. In the feminist movement, they want equality between the sexes. Have you heard that? They want equality.
Yeah.
Is there any such thing as equality?
Yeah, I guess it depends on how you define the term. But I think but I think in the way that they use it, probably not.
Right. So you don't want something you can win. So
Right.
if you tell me you want to defeat this levy, well, the levy you can win. It's clearly there's a clear definition, and it's done. So again, we're looking at two different models. If you continue in issue advocacy while they build permanent social movements that turn into the nonprofit industrial complex that has permanent resources flowing through them, how can you get the same outcome? They're working 24 hours and you're only working in the election years because you're looking for political power and they're looking for institutional power. So now you said, how did they take over the schools? What would you call K through 12 an institution?
Yeah, absolutely.
And is it the labor movement woven into the institution?
Oh, 100%.
There you go. So now it's the natural consequence that they win. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, they have people working within their movements. You are waiting for every 2 to 4 years to have an election. Then you put forth a candidate. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. When you win, you will take over and you will slow them down. Never defeat, slow.
Right.
Does it make sense that now we have to do what? We have to create a social movement.
Yeah. And we absolutely have to push back against a lot of that. And one of the crazy things about this, especially as you've been describing how the left kind of slowly took over that institution, is that one, it's amazing how many conservatives just buy into that. Like they just tacitly accept that the left controls the schools and they don't really do anything. They might complain on social media, but they don't do anything to change it. And in fact, like there are a lot of people on the right, and I think that this did change a little bit with COVID when people were actually like watching what their kids were doing in the classroom on video calls all day long. But there are a lot of people on the right that actually accepted or didn't care about what was happening to their kids at school. And some of that might be changing right now, but it's very obvious that the left has controlled this. And the second part of that too is that our public schools are not doing well. Like as these schools have become more and more politicized, like they failed to deliver the product that they were designed to give, which is to actually provide these kids with an education. So besides the fact that it's become kind of a battleground for these institutional political organizations to try to take them over, what are some of the other problems that are facing our public school systems today?
Well, the number one problem is that they are not failing by accident. They're failing by design. So it is not just a feature, it's by design. They cannot satisfy what we need. Okay, we started a school system in 1635. With the first so-called public school being Boston Latin in 1635. There's no product that we use in America that is running on the same model from 1635. We are no longer driving the Model T. If we were, it would be defective. If we were using the same airplane as the Wright brothers invented, it would be defective. We should not be shocked if a lot of them were falling out of the sky.
Right.
If we were using the same phone that Alexander Graham Bell invented, we would not have the internet. That phone does not have the capacity to have the internet. So these schools do not have capacity to give us what we need. So we cannot continue to use them. They cannot be fixed. There's no repair. We have to get a new model of education. In 1635, there was a teacher standing in front of a class with a blackboard. That is what we have now.
Right.
So you cannot fix this. We have a different society that needs a different model of education. We have a one-size-fits-all approach to 50 million students. They cannot learn all the same way. So we have the capacity to build diversity into K through 12, and that cannot happen with the current system. Okay, I'll move to another topic, but I hope it gives another layer of understanding.
No, it really does. And again, with the current model of education, well, one, it's been so watered down over the last 20 or 30 years. You have No Child Left Behind in the early 2000s, which essentially made all instruction geared towards standardized standardized language arts and mathematics tests. And so that is going to limit what the kids are able to learn in the classroom. And then you have behavioral standards that are incredibly low. Like kids can come in and be disruptive and disrespectful and make it difficult for other kids to learn. And there are no consequences for that. So it's very obvious. And if you look at the nation's report card, like our kids are not testing well. Like we're not doing well compared to other students around the world. And all of this is because, as you said, these institutions are just fundamentally broken. And I think that there is, going back to what you said about people that might be more conservative oriented, not having an action plan. Even a lot of I teach in Kentucky, and a lot of my coworkers, they might be like economically, like kind of like old school liberals or economically progressives, but socially they're very conservative. And a lot of the people that I work with, they understand like that the public schools have a lot of these problems, but no one really knows how to fix it. Like no one knows what we can do to make this system better. There's not a clear vision. It's more of just a negative. This isn't working, but what do we do? The public school system just exists, and there's not much we can do to fix it. So
what if I was asking you a question as a libertarian and I was just a hardcore communist? I'm still living in the Soviet Union like it's 1962, and I just keep saying in 1972, 1982, 1992. And if I just keep saying, but why can't we just keep tinkering with it and then it'll work?
Right.
But it won't. The nature of communism is that it won't work. It's like lions eat gazelles. There's no example when the gazelle is going to eat the lion. So there's a nature to that system, and there's a nature to the government. And the nature of government is that it does not operate well.
Yes.
So why would I keep saying, well, no one knows how to fix it? That assumes that it could be fixed.
Right.
So we're operating on bad assumptions. We have the capacity to build a very diverse, and I compare it to a buffet. When you walk into a buffet, imagine you walk into a buffet and they have 40 options. And what if all 40 of the options were the same? Is it a buffet?
No.
Right. It should be 40 different things. And that's what we need for schools, K through 12 schools. We need a buffet of options. So some students are going to need, let's just say, an all-boys school. Do you think that there's some boys that would do better in an all-boys school?
100% agree with that.
Okay,
yes.
So let's take that agreement and write it on the wall. Some boys would do better in an all-boys school. Then look at what I have right now. Our government schools cannot, by the nature of government schools, they can't segregate based on sex.
Yeah.
So now I can't fix the problem because I have a clash of principles, a clash of values, a clash of what is possible. So if I say some students may need half homeschool, half regular school. But we don't have the capacity to do that in the government school because we're clashing with the unions.
Yeah.
Are they going to say we're going to start hiring teachers and paying them 50% less because they're only working 50% of the time? No. Yeah. Only the free market can fix this because only the free market can adapt and can adapt quickly because they have different motivations. They're motivated to accommodate parents or accommodate customers or clients. So again, we're just dealing with two different things that cannot exist at the same time. Something's going to have to go away. No, it's not. Now, I get this feedback and it's utterly ridiculous, but I still will quote it. People will say, well, you can't have your own fire department. Right. So the assumption is that that educating K through 12 is the same as a fire department. That's utterly ridiculous.
It is.
And let me tell you why. Right now, there's 99,000 government schools. 99,000. There's about 35,000 private schools. So we already have a model where about a third of it is already privatized. We don't have a model where a third of the fire departments are already privatized. We don't have a model where all of the original fire departments were all private. But in education, the original model was all private. Yeah. The original model was homeschooling and some private tutoring for the wealthy. So they came in, created a model that's government-based, that's rooted in socialism, and now they're acting like this is the way it's always been, and we've never done anything different. But that's not true because the nation, the landscape is littered with things that are being done different, and they're doing better. So we have something to compare the failure to, and that's what they don't like. They don't like that you can literally say, hey, in Baltimore, you have 33, that's what the numbers just came out, of the bottom schools in Baltimore City have 0 students on grade level for reading and math.
Oh, that's crazy.
0. But you can't show me 33 private schools that have 0 students on grade level. Why not?
Right, because the parents wouldn't pay to send them there, yeah.
Exactly, because there's a different nature. So we can't keep comparing things that, again, you're comparing the lion to the gazelle. They have two completely different natures. If I literally gave $1 million to every parent who was trapped in a failing school, would they continue to buy that product they're buying right now?
Oh, absolutely not.
Right. So then you can't compare the two because the private model is voluntary exchanges. It's voluntary. Nobody forces you to go to that particular private school. They also have a different model because the vast majority of the private schools are operating on a lower per student budget than the government schools. So you're getting you're getting more money to deliver a defective product. That's why they have to maintain force because they know if anyone gets a choice, they would leave.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And there, I mean, in the state of Kentucky too, there was some, I guess it came from the Kentucky Department of Education, but someone quantified those numbers and it cost the taxpayers on average $14,000 per student per year in the state of Kentucky. Whereas like the average private school tuition in Northern Kentucky, where I'm from, is about $6,000 a year a kid. Now people will look at that $6,000 a year price point without knowing how much money we spend on public education students and go, well, $6,000 is a lot to spend on kids, but we're spending more than twice that to send these kids to public schools that aren't even delivering the goods. And one of the really sad things about this, and I want to ask you about the school choice movement here in just a second, is that I taught in an inner city school for a couple of years, and it was exactly like, I mean, not as bad as Baltimore, but very similar makeup to Baltimore, where these schools were just not providing these kids with an education that they needed. And it was sad because you saw that there were some parents that would, if they had another option, send their kids somewhere else. But because they're forced to pay taxes for the public schools and it's very difficult to move for a lot of them, they were just stuck sending their kids to this one school. They had no choice, and they were forced to send their kids to schools where they felt like they weren't getting an education. And that's just such a heartbreaking thing to see, that people don't have choices. So walk us through that. Where do you stand on school choice and on trying to give people more of those options?
Okay, so let me start by addressing the financial incentives that you touched on, the $14,000 versus the 6,000. Because again, a lot of the pushback I get automatically revolves around money.
Yeah.
So my research inevitably led me to look at education in other countries. And it was shocking what I was able to find that the money is irrelevant. Poverty and your ability to learn phonics have absolutely nothing to do with each other. There is no intersection whatsoever. If I go to a person who your child is, if I had Elon Musk's 5-year-old in front of me and wanted to teach that child ABCs versus the poorest person in America and I wanted to teach that child ABCs, the fact that they were the richest or the poorest child in America would have no impact on their ability to understand that A sounds like
Yeah.
apple. They have nothing to do with each other. So it has nothing to do with money. I found data on education policy in the poorest nations. This data came out of countries where they make less than $5 a day. There was a school not in Africa. This school was in India. It was so informal that some man created his own little school for the poorest kids in India. They have to work every day. They don't get to go to a building. He created a school under a bridge. He literally has like a whiteboard under a bridge. He goes there and he writes their assignments on the whiteboard. They come under the bridge before they go to their jobs. They learn their assignments and then they go to their jobs. There is no money involved. I guarantee you those kids would outperform the average American student. They have schools where they have no desks. They have no chairs. They all sit on a dirt floor. I guarantee you those kids will be outperforming the average American student. So the money myth is just that, a myth. Next, you mentioned like the schools that people are forced to send their kid to.
Yeah.
I call that zip code jail.
Yeah, it is. That's a good way of putting it.
The zip code jail. The zip code systems were created during segregation and they are still maintained. And they are ridiculous. There is no other model in America where I am required to do business with someone based upon the zip code. I'm not required to get a job based upon my zip code. I'm not required to eat in restaurants based upon my zip code. I'm not required to go to a doctor based upon my zip code. I'm not required to buy a car, a home, nothing based upon my zip code. I'm in the free market in 90% of what you do in the United States. So all we're saying is erase the zip codes, give the funding to the parent, and let the parent decide. We don't know what the final model is going to look like. We just know that free markets work. If people can decide what they want, what is best for their own child, the market's going to respond. Someone is going to say, I'll create the all boys school because I see that need. Someone's going to say, I'll create the school that's heavy in STEM because there's a lot of kids that are naturally inclined towards that. Someone's going to say, I'm going to create the model that's based on trades and the maybe construction because there's a market for that. We automatically know that's what's going to happen because we have centuries and centuries and centuries or thousands of years of evidence that that's what happened. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then the other question I want to put to you from this too, because this is a common objection that I hear when I talk about trying to free up the public education system is how would, and you kind of alluded to the money issue a little bit earlier, but how would kids that come from families with no money be able to go to school? How would that work in a free market education system?
Well, the typical model that we have right now for school choice is the gold standard is called money follow the child. So there's an amount of money that is already allocated based on taxes for education. You said in Kentucky that's about 14,000. So then your legislature would decide, okay, we're going to give a coupon. Some people call it a voucher. Some of them are education savings accounts where each child gets that account and then their parent is allowed to go into the free market and find a school that's a good fit for their student. So we would do the
Yeah.
exact same thing. That's exactly how it's working right now. Florida is at the cutting edge as far as school choice goes. Their school choice program is over 20 years old, but they just went to money follow the child. They just removed a lot of the restrictions that they had earlier. So now, again, it's no different than, let's just say, the government program Section 8, where you can get housing, where you get a voucher that has a certain value on it. And you go into the private market and you find a landlord that's willing to accept this voucher in exchange for his rent, and then you move in. So this is not creating something from whole cloth. We already have these models. The same happens with a lot of daycare. In daycare, parents and poor parents can get a voucher to help them pay for daycare as a subsidy for daycare. They go into the free market, they shop around, they find the daycare that they like. As long as that owner of that daycare center says, yes, I'm willing to exchange this voucher for this service. This is not uncommon. There's something called food stamps, where poor parents, poor families get a voucher. They are able to go into the open market, go to any grocery store that they want and shop, as long as that grocery store says, we're willing to exchange this food, these products, for this voucher. Do we force any grocery stores to take it? No. Do we force all daycares to take the voucher? No. Do we force all landlords to take the program? No. So that's going to operate the same as it operates right now.
Yeah, I love that. And, I know we got a couple minutes left here. I want you to plug homeschooling, because there are a lot of people that I think, especially like I said before, COVID marked a massive shift in the way that people understand our public education system. And I know more and more people that are choosing to either homeschool their kids or send them to private school. The prospect of homeschooling can be scary for a lot of parents. And I think that there are a lot of parents that worry that their kids won't be properly socialized. But of course, like being inside the school system, I don't think our kids are being properly socialized by the school systems either. So I don't really see that as too much of a threat. But make the case for homeschooling. So if someone came to you and said, hey, we're thinking about it, what would your advice be to that person? And what would be some of the benefits that you might talk to them about?
Well, I can tell you that the argument about socialization when it comes to homeschooling is dead in the water.
Yeah, yes, it is.
Once you have public school, government school children that are identifying as furries, then you can no longer make the argument about socialization in homeschooling. And I think,
and then too, just like on top of that, there's no other institution in the world where you can go and you're constantly bullied and harassed, and no one can do anything about it legally. Like if you have a job and someone's constantly harassing you, that person loses their job. But in schools, you give that kid an IP and they just get to continue to do it without there being any consequences. So yeah, 100% with you on that.
Well, that's actually a great parallel, because the exact same people who argue that you shouldn't do anything in the government schools would say the complete opposite if it was in a private business and you could show a pattern of being harassed and that the employer was doing nothing about it. So I'm filing that under mental gymnastics, and then I keep moving.
Yeah.
So homeschooling is the most exciting part of what's going on with school choice right now, because the fastest growing segment of the homeschool population is actually the Black community. There are now numbers of about 500,000 Black students being homeschooled. And the data is irrefutable that the Black students are operating like 30% higher grades when they're in homeschooling than they are the exact same students, Black students in the exact same community that are in the government schools. So the Black parents that I know that are doing homeschooling are reporting a much higher satisfaction rate with the relationship with their children. They're reporting better grades. They're reporting that the data as far as the testing goes for them being able to get into college is the higher quality, better grades. So homeschooling, I again feel like is going to be the pioneer area. They're doing homeschool co-ops. They have so much more opportunity to have creativity. I know another person who homeschools, and she regularly brings in just people from the community, let's just say a real estate agent, a doctor, she gets her kids exposed to people in all these different industries where they literally can have a 1 day exposure to someone. And okay, great. Just access to information that you are not going to get in the public schools. So the real problem isn't what are we going to do? 34 states have now passed meaningful school choice reform. 34 states. So we know what we're going to do. We know where this is going.
Yeah.
The last two cases that went to the Supreme Court, both cases affirmed that the parents have the right, that the local legislatures have the authority to put in school choice with very few restrictions. The last case was challenged based upon whether or not parents would be able to use their vouchers to go to religious schools. The Supreme Court affirmed that the state does not have the authority to tell someone that they cannot access religious instruction. If you open up the program to parents, you can't put a religious restriction on it. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Blaine amendments.
No. What's that?
Oh, okay. So this was the root of the problem. Again, let's go back on this 100-year snapshot. This is probably older than 100 years. But there were these amendments that were put on because there was a battle, apparently, when state education really started getting up and rolling. There was a Christian battle between the Protestants and the Catholics.
Go figure.
So Catholics, as we know, they have always had their own separate school system. And this was the trigger for them to start really building their own school system. So the Protestants felt like the public schools were going to be a Protestant institution. So Catholics, being brilliant that they are, said to themselves, if we send our kids to Protestant schools, they're going to become Protestant. So we have to have our own schools. So slowly the Protestants tried to get a federal amendment that would bar, basically, they called religious instruction from public schools. Now, meanwhile, they were teaching Protestantism the whole time.
Yeah, of course.
They couldn't pass it. So slowly, these states started passing what was called Blaine amendments from some Senator Blaine. And they were blocking government school money from going to religious institutions. Translation, blocking government money from going to Catholic schools. So the Blaine amendments have been in place up until 2 years ago. So that last Supreme Court case, when they said you cannot make restrictions based upon religion, basically erased the Blaine amendments across the country.
Oh, that's really interesting. So I want to ask you too, as we come to a close today, and it sounds like you're feeling pretty optimistic about the future. So what do you think about the future of school choice, and what would it take to convince more and more Americans, especially those that are towards the center, to jump on board the ideas of free market education?
Okay, I'm going to tell you, this is something where the people are already there. We have the numbers, whether white, Black, Asian, or Hispanic. We already have the majority of the people who want more education options. So we're talking about in the low numbers, maybe 60%. In the high numbers, it could be 75%, depending on the poll that you look at. So we have the majority. What we don't have is the marketplace. So right now, we need to just build more private schools, more options. So I've done that as well. I've looked at the landscape, and what jumped out at me? The fact that we have 99,000 government schools versus 330,000 churches that sit empty 90% of the time. So you have the infrastructure. Not only do you have infrastructure, you have buildings that pretty much operate 1 day a week at Sunday school. They already have much of the system that looks like a school. Most churches have a little kitchen. Most churches have little rooms that are already divided up. So the capacity to build micro schools already exists. The school choice legislation is the funding mechanism. So churches could tap into school choice funding, turn their building into micro schools. So now, can we have the all-boys school that we may need? Yeah. Can we have the all-girls school that we may need? Yeah. Can we have the little trade school that we may need? Yeah. Can we have different types of curriculum? Yeah. So we just needed this convergence. We have the funding mechanism, we have the buildings, we actually now have the staff. I know you said you're a teacher, so I don't know if you're familiar with this statistic. Just came out of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. As of 2021, 600,000 teachers have left the industry.
Yeah, yeah, and they're leaving at a more rapid rate than ever before.
So that's an opportunity. There's a whole new industry, and it's called the edupreneurs. These are people who just start their own schools. So now I can work directly with parents. Imagine you being a teacher and you can just start your own school. You don't have to go through the unions. You don't have to go through all these levels of bureaucracy. You already have the intellectual capacity. You already have the experience. You just open up a micro school. Fewer than 100 kids. You can have a K through 12 school system. If you go back to the original model in America, we had the one-room schoolhouse.
Yeah.
Different grades were all in the same Little House on the Prairie school. So you just need a couple of rooms and you could break it out and say, this has 3 grades in it, this has 3 grades in it, this has 3 grades in it. Easily get up to 100. So now let me go back to Florida. Florida gives $8,000 for tuition for school choice. If you had 100 students, you now have an $800,000 budget to manage a micro school. You can get creative. You can bring in lots of volunteers. You can bring up most of your curriculum through a flat screen TV. So again, once this meets the free market, we're going to start seeing an explosion of the micro school movement. And that's what we need. And that's what's going to solve the poverty issues. So when we're talking about school choice, we should be asking ourselves one question. Can school choice defeat poverty?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes.
Right. So when are you going to start that micro school, Alex?
Hey, believe me, well, I can't say too much on air here, but believe me, the thought has crossed my mind, and I've had some conversations with people that would be happy to send their kids to one of those schools. So, Lisa Watson, the work that you do is incredible. I'm on board with everything you're saying right here. As someone who is on the inside, like, I think that you've identified the problems correctly, and you've laid out like a really great path to solve these problems. And I just really appreciate all the work that you're doing. Also, our audience will never know how many technological hurdles we had to overcome to make this interview happen today. But I'm so appreciative that you were able to stick with me and that we were able to get this recorded. Before I let you go today, just tell people, where can they find your work? Tell us about your podcast, all of that stuff.
Okay, you guys, if you're on Twitter, you can find me at Watson Speaking on Twitter. That's WATSON Speaking. I launched a podcast with the Herzog Foundation. So you can find Herzog Foundation. They are doing amazing work. I think they're going to become a household name in the school choice movement. So go to herzogfoundation.com. What they are doing is they are actually training teachers. They are training these edupreneurs, and they offer free training, some in person, some online. They also just launched a new homeschool movement. So if you're looking to start a homeschool or you're looking to start a homeschool co-op, you can go and sign up for their homeschool program, and you're going to get everything that you need A to Z. And that's also for if you want to start your own private Christian school. They do advocate for Christian education, but you do get free training. That training is called Schoolbox. So go to herzogfoundation.com, look up the Schoolbox program, sign up to get trained on how to start your own private school. The name of my podcast is School's Out. Not sure if you can see it. School's Out with Lisa Watson. And I talk a lot about building these social movements. So again, we're not going to get any traction on the right. You're not going to get traction if you're a libertarian. You're not going to get traction if you're a Christian, if you're a patriot, if you're a conservative, as long as you're trapped in the issue advocacy model. We're going to have to move this model over to the social movement model. And I actually go in detail and describe, like a training session, what does it look like to have a social movement comparable to what they did with the pro-choice movement, the feminist movement, the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the school choice movement. And each movement actually has specific characteristics. Well, all social movements have 7 characteristics. So you can bring me back and I'm going to break down the 7 characteristics of a successful social movement. So that means everybody's got to come back and listen to the next show.
Yeah, we will have to make sure that happens here. I'm going to put links to all that in the show notes. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Alex. Had a great time.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at theprotestantlibertarian@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter. You can follow me at the handle @ProLibertyPod. Again, that is @ProLibertyPod. And you can also visit me at theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com. At theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com, you can also support the Christians for Liberty Network and the Libertarian Christian Institute. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode, and we will see you next Tuesday.